probably the biggest story, at least domestically, from a domestic perspective, is Donald Trump's new executive order regarding drug pricing. As you probably know, as everybody keeps articulating, and as Donald Trump has certainly said in the executive order, the United States pays significantly higher drug prices than the rest of the world. Well, it turns out that's not really true. It's just not really true. So it is true that the United States pays much more than the rest of the world on drugs that are, within their patent period, drugs that are not yet generic. We pay quite a bit more, and we'll get to that. But what percentage of all drug prescriptions are actually drugs that do not have competition, that do not have generics? Well, it turns out that's only 9% of prescriptions, less than 10%. And yes, we pay a lot more on that. But on 91% of prescriptions, which are generics, we pay significantly less than the rest of the world. It's competition. We're a massive consumer market. And that competition drives down prices in the United States far more than it drives down prices in the rest of the world. And if you weight them, if you weight the higher prices on the 9% with the lower prices on the 91%, you get that generally we pay, on our drugs, less than, for example, what the rest of the OECD, other advanced countries, pay. Did you guys know that? So we keep hearing about we pay more for drug prices, but it turns out that that's just not true. We pay more for some drugs, and we pay less for other drugs. And on average, we pay less than the rest of the world pays, or at least the other developed countries pay on drugs. This is why you're listening to your Yaron Brook show, because you hear stuff you don't hear anywhere else. Nobody is going to tell you that. Nobody. Certainly not President Trump. So here's what President Trump has to say. For many years, the world has wondered why prescription drugs and pharmaceuticals in the United States of America were so much higher in price, all caps, than they were in other nations, sometimes being 5 to 10 times more expensive than the same drug manufactured in the exact same laboratory or plant by the same company, all in all caps, now lower caps. It was always difficult to explain and very embarrassing because, in fact, there was no correct and rightful answer. Oh, yes, there is. We'll get to that. The pharmaceutical drug companies would say for years that it was research and development costs, and that all of these costs were and would be, for no reason whatsoever, borne by the suckers of America alone. Campaign contributions can do wonders, but not with me, and not with the Republican Party. We are going to do the right thing. Something that the Democrats have fought for many years. It's actually the Republicans have fought against this for many years, but okay. Therefore, I'm pleased to announce that tomorrow morning in the White House at 9 a.m., I will be signing one of the most consequential executive orders in our country's history. I think there's some truth to that. Prescription drug and pharmaceutical prices will be reduced almost immediately by 30 to 80%. They will rise throughout the world in order to equate, and for the first time in many years, bring fairness to America. Fairness to America, all caps, of course. I will be instituting a most favored nations policy whereby the United States will pay the same price as the nation that pays the lowest price anywhere in the world. Our country will finally be treated fairly, and our citizens' health care costs will be reduced by numbers never even thought of before. Never thought of before. Additionally, on top of everything else, the United States will save trillions of dollars. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. All right, so the way this is going to actually be implemented is Medicaid will refuse to pay drug companies a price that is higher than the lowest price that any company out there pays. And since countries like Rwanda and Sri Lanka are very poor, and the only way they can afford many of these drugs is if the price is significantly lower, sometimes 80% lower, then the United States will insist on getting the same price as Sri Lanka and Rwanda is getting. And if you have a non-economic, simple mind, then that seems to suggest that drug prices in the United States will go down by 80%. Because, hey, we'll stop paying the same prices as Sri Lanka. Isn't that cool? Now, we'll get to the consequence if that actually happened on our future in a minute. But let me just warn you of something that, the book Economics in One Lesson should teach us all. Never accept what appears to be first-level economic assumptions, effects. Oh, if we are willing to pay what Sri Lanka pays, we won't pay more than that, then the price will drop 80%. Well, but is that true? Is that what will happen? What else could happen? You're a drug company. You sell a huge amount of your drugs in the United States. Most of your profits come from the United States. You sell a tiny little bit of your drugs in Sri Lanka. Now the United States is insisting on getting the same price as Sri Lanka. What are you going to do? You don't want to lose your U.S. market. You don't want to give up the profits that you're making in the U.S. market. So what do? Well, you raise the price in Sri Lanka. Indeed, you raise the price across the world. And part of that, what happens there is you stop selling the drug in Sri Lanka because when you raise the price, they can't afford it. So you stop selling. You make a list of the countries where you're selling the drug for the cheapest, and you stop selling it there. And then, you go to the Europeans and you go to everybody else and you say, yeah, we can't continue to sell them at these really low prices. You have a choice. You can withdraw. We're not giving up the American market. American market is just too big. You can either raise the price or we're going to stop selling. Now, you might think that, hey, this is a phenomenal outcome. Now, note, it's not the outcome President Trump claims, right? President Trump claims the drug prices are going to go down by 50 to 100%. They're not. Drug prices probably will not go down much at all in the United States. They tried this before, where they said Medicare can't pay more than other insurance companies. Other insurance companies were sometimes getting better deals than Medicare. So they said Medicare has to have most favored nation status. It has to get the best price. And they thought that what would happen would be that the price in Medicare would go down. And that's not what happened. What happened was that the price for the private insurance companies went up over time. So, because people can switch out of Medicare and go to private insurance companies, we don't have a competitive market. Medicare is socialized medicine for everybody over 65. You have to be part of it. There's no competitive pressure to drive down prices. There's competitive pressure to drive up prices. So it's just not going to happen the way Trump says it's going to happen. Prices of American drugs are not going to drop by 50 to 80%. But prices will go up globally. Now, you might say, well, that's a good thing. we now will have all these other countries paying, right, into the system, whereas in the past, the United States consumers have basically funded R&D for these drug companies. Now the rest of the world will fund R&D for these drug companies. But again, that's not clear that that will happen. As prices go up in many of these countries, demand will go down, total revenues will go down. In the United States, it won't change. Maybe in the United States, they'll have to cut prices somewhat. Maybe they'll cut them by 10%, something. But overall profitability of the drug companies will decline. If profitability of the drug companies decline, it's not super high today. If the amount of revenue they bring in declines, then they will do less research and development. And therefore, if they do less research and development, we will get significantly fewer drugs in the future. People have done some calculations, and we're talking about potentially hundreds of new drugs that we could have, we won't have. Now, some of that is already happening because of the Inflation Reduction Act, which allowed the president to choose 10 drugs that, he could determine the price and lower the price artificially in the United States, which Biden passed and Biden has done. By some estimate, I guess Tyler Cowen has run some estimates on that. Let me just find this post. Tyler Cowen has run some estimates on that. By his estimates, there will be 135 fewer drugs that will come to market through 2039 because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, this one has the potential to reduce pharmaceutical revenues far more than the Inflation Reduction Act, and therefore affect many, many more drugs than this. This is an unmitigated disaster if you care about your health. Now, people are upset because the United States pays high drug prices, and these other countries pay lower prices, and in a sense, we're subsidizing them. Pharmaceuticals make a chunk of their profits in the US. They use those profits for R&D, but the benefit of that R&D, the whole world benefits from. So there's a sense in which we're subsidizing the whole of the world. And that might be true. So here I ask you the question, what would you rather have? A system where we get a lot of life-saving drugs and maybe life extension drugs and innovation in drugs and a lot of money flowing into R&D, and yet we're subsidizing the world. Or we stop subsidizing the world, but we get fewer drugs. I mean, to me, the answer is pretty clear. I would much rather subsidize the rest of the world and get more drugs, better drugs in the future, than stop and not get those drugs. Now, there is a third alternative. This would require diplomacy. This would require actually use of American, what foreign policy people call soft power, and that is to try to influence other countries to negotiate higher prices, to up their particularly rich companies like the OECD, the Europeans, the Canadians, and so on. And there might be creative ways in which we could nudge them to actually pay more for the benefits that they're getting from these drugs. But this is not it. What this will do is it'll price out of the market poor countries. Now, what do you think the effect of that is? Because these poor countries, you think they're just going to roll over and play dead? That is, do you think that they will just say, okay, well, we can't get these drugs, so people will not get drugs, and they'll just die? They just won't get benefit from the drugs. What is the alternative to that? Again, this is what economic thinking is all about. Trade-offs, choices, options. What will happen to Sri Lanka or Rwanda when they can't get that, medication that helps lower blood pressure or fights cancer or is used in treating cancer? They can't get it. It's a proprietary medication produced by one producer in the world under patent, and they can't afford it anymore. What are they going to do? And drug companies know this. This is why they give them the discounts. What are they going to do? I'm curious if anybody has an answer to what are they going to do. Yeah, I don't see any. What are they going to do? Well, what does this provide people an incentive to do? It provides people an incentive to do is to break the patent. Good job, Ayn Rand fan club. To break the patent. It incentivizes countries like India that have a huge generic drug manufacturing base to significantly expand into generic drugs where the patent is still in place and make copies of all these drugs and start selling them to places like Sri Lanka and Rwanda, not compete in America because they would be sued if they did. And what are the drug companies going to do? Are the drug companies going to sue them? Are they really going to go after them that hard? Probably not, because the drug companies are going to be viewed as villains if they do. Are you denying the Rwandans life-saving drugs? I mean, that would be awful. The PR would be catastrophic. So Rwanda will probably still get their medicines. They'll suffer for a while. You know, people will die. And in the meantime, you know, generic manufacturers will start producing these drugs. They will get them to Rwanda. Prices in America will not drop 50 to 80%, guarantee that. They will drop maybe a little bit, maybe 5, 10%, who knows, but they might not drop at all. And prices in Europe will go up, you know, that's okay by me. But the total effect of this is that drug companies will make less money because they'll lose big chunks of the market. Remember, the populations are really, really big in countries that are relatively poor and are getting the best deals in terms of drugs, and no deals are going to be available because if you give somebody a deal, the United States gets that deal immediately. So you can't give anybody a deal. So I don't know, think about Nigeria with one of the largest populations in the world, or Indonesia, or Malaysia, or, you know, I don't even know what the prices are of these drugs in these countries. But it just all collapses. There's no benefit to actually seeing lower drug prices for the 9% of prescriptions that are on patent. We want companies to make money off of those drugs. Because if they're not going to make money off of those drugs, lots of money off of those drugs, they won't invest in future drugs. And you know, this has been shown over and over again. When you put price controls, for example, you know, years ago, Medicare decided that they were going to aggressively demand price reductions on durable medical equipment. The average price reduction was 61%. So these are like medical equipment stuff. So somebody ran a study on this, and what they find was the innovation in the medical devices plummeted. Firms had much less incentive and revenue to invest in R&D. The data showed new product launches fell by 25%. Patent filings, a proxy for innovation activity, dropped a whopping 75% after the tax cuts. This is an article written by G. N. Rogers, a study. Patents fell by 75%. Innovation gets crushed. So do you really want prices to go down? So it turns out that Republicans, MAGA Republicans, are socialists. They're quite happy to embrace stupid economic policy, quite happy to embrace socialist type economic policy if Trump thinks it's a good idea. I can also say that it's quite clear that the people around Trump just don't know economics. They come up with populist slogans, like we're going to cut drug prices, without thinking through the actual consequences of what they're doing from an economics perspective. They need a Henry Hazlitt. Somebody on Trump's economic team needs to read this old book from, 1947 or 1949, called Economics in One Lesson, which would explain, not specifically with regard to this point, but would explain the principles involved, that price controls, even these kind of price controls, you never get the result you intend. There's a second level consequences and third level consequences, some of which I've described to you here. Again, not stuff you will get on anybody else's podcast. So no, this is a disastrous policy. It's a socialist policy, or put it more, it's a left-wing economic policy. But, and I'm not talking about the hypocrisy here, right? The fact that Donald Trump criticizes Kamala Harris for exactly this kind of idea. You know, here's what he wrote in August of last year. If you think things are expensive now, they will get 100 times worse if Kamala gets 4 years as president. Under her plan, Kamala will implement Soviet-style price controls. She will abolish private health care and make California's ridiculous tax policies the law of the land. What is he doing? What is he doing? So these price controls, stupid policy. They are not going to achieve what they aim to achieve. They will destroy innovation and progress in healthcare moving forward. They're kind of the worst of all worlds. There is no problem with drugs. The reason we in America consume more drugs than any place else in the world per capita is because we're rich. We have enough money. We consume almost everything more than everybody else in the world. We consume more housing. We consume more cars. We consume more food. Look at us. We consume more drugs because we're rich. When you're rich, you consume stuff. I'm sure we consume more vitamins, even though those are not regulated, not expensive. We consume more of them. So, yeah, it's, and by the way, we have great healthcare. When you look at actually curing diseases and not lifestyle, the United States has great healthcare and great survivability and great life expectancy if you look at diseases, not at lifestyle. Lifestyle, we suck. We're so rich, we overeat. We overconsume in certain areas. And that causes all kinds of health problems. Absolutely true. And we're so riddled with crazy, stupid policies that, people are alienated and confused and depressed, and they take drugs that they don't need. And in some cases, they take the illegal kind of drugs and kill themselves. So, say goodbye to all the wonderful drugs that could be in our future that Donald Trump has helped eliminate. Literally eliminate with one executive order. Now, the good news is, there is good news. The good news is, like a lot of these executive orders, there's a chance that this is not going to get through. That is, this will be challenged in the courts, that, it's not clear that he has the authority to do this as an executive order, and that this will never actually become, there's nothing in the executive order in terms of how this is going to be implemented, how it's done. When Biden did the price controls on drugs, it went through legislation. None of that for Trump. It was evil enough that Congress approved this, and by the way, with some Republican votes. But, the good news of an executive order with regard to this is there's a chance that none of this will happen. Now, I will note that some drugs are already in short supply in the United States. It's hard to get certain things. This is not helping. If we want to reduce the cost of drugs, if we want to make drugs, I mean, the helpful kind of drugs, more accessible, more prevalent, more available to Americans, then the solution, as always, is deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. That will reduce price. I mean, the FDA is a massive cost and a massive burden to American pharmaceutical companies. It's why drugs are so expensive. So that is the solution. Not more controls, more regulations, more distortions of the market. So again, economic analysis shows this ain't gonna work, guys. And if it does work, it's a disaster. And even if not working, it's a disaster. It's just bad, bad, bad policy all around.